the origin of this book, Must Labour Always Lose? I know I'm not talking to a Labour audience especially, but there was a very famous book written in 1960, really a long pamphlet by a man called Mark Abrahams, who was a sociologist, a professor, but also was one of the guys who founded the early opinion polls. I don't know if it was Ipsos or Mori, one of those outfits. And he asked the question, why was the Labour Party incapable of winning an election? And of course, as soon as he published it, Labour Party got up and won the next election. Now, I'm not saying that is a logical consequence of my little effort. We'll have to wait and see. And there are some other intervening issues at the time that were quite important. But I'm sitting behind me, there's about 2.5 million words of diaries I kept as an MP and a minister, because I woke up in 1995. I'm a journalist by background, I can write quite easily. And I thought, you're going to have a ringside seat, Dennis, you'll be a minister, you do all this European stuff for Blair, that's your expertise. Europe will be a big issue for the Labour government, so you'll be at the heart of things, you'll be in number 10 a lot. You have a duty almost to history to write everything down, which I did. And I just haven't got around to editing them yet. 2.5 million words is about 100 books. Getting all that material under control is a bit of a task. And as I started, I thought, well, actually, there's a much shorter book here, which is to ask why in the 50 years I've been in the Labour Party, were we only ever able to win election in 4 of them? In fact, since 1966, the Labour Party has won election in only 4 years, 2 in 1974, then 1997, 2001, 2005. That is it. So, okay, it gives you the 6 years of the Labour government in the 1970s, and of course the 13 years of the Blair and Brown government that ended 11 years ago. But it's not a very good record. And I just set my mind to thinking, why? I mean, what did I go through as a young activist, as I was stood in 1974, as a young candidate, as a young trade unionist, and then working abroad and coming back to Britain to tell the Labour Party what to do, and a writer and an activist, and then an MP, and then a minister. What is it that we just haven't got right? Why are we so bad at winning elections? And I see that dear old Ken Clarke has been out today in an interview talking about the danger of an elected dictatorship. Well, some of you may be old enough just to remember that is what Lord Hailsham called the Labour government of 1974. And Ken then goes on to say Margaret Thatcher was a great supporter of the single market. She was, but after she stopped being Prime Minister, she then became a great supporter of Euroscepticism stroke anti-Europeanism stroke out and out leaving the EU by the end of her working life before sadly she became ill. And I mean, I'm trying to invite my friends in the Labour Party in particular to stop wallowing in nostalgia. Stop. I mean, I'm a great fan of Tony Blair, of Gordon Brown, of Peter Mandelson. They're friends, they still are friends. But some of you may have seen those documentaries where they were telling us how great they were 30 years ago. I'm sorry, guys. Can you get off all of our lawns? The Labour Party will never breathe again if all they're told is how wonderful it all was with a different set of leaders 30 years ago. But what I would say is that when Lord Hailsham, in some despair, said Britain is now moving to an elected dictatorship, well, he couldn't have been more wrong, because the Tory party did find its way out. It did elect Mrs. Thatcher, not especially my cup of tea, but she instituted new ideas, new thinking, promoted new younger people, and the Conservative Party had a very long run in power. So there's nothing wrong with Britain at the moment that a revived, regenerated, well-led Labour Party that's got a lot of ideas, a lot of thinking, a lot of outreach to different political groups, can't in a way put right. I hope my book, it's not finger pointing. I don't say, oh, it's all the fault of horrible Jeremy Corbyn. It's all the fault of wretched Tony Blair and the war in Iraq. I mean, there are criticisms of mistakes that everybody made, but I'm trying, it's a book for the Labour Party as well as the general public. I'm trying to get my own party, as it were, sit down and talk about why it is we are so good at losing. And I hope quite soon I'll stop speaking and we'll do the rest of this meeting through questions and answers, which are always much more fun for me at any rate. And the more I thought about it, the more I concluded that there are really 3 P's in politics, always have been, always will be. P number 1 is personalities. As Canning said in a debate in the beginning of the 19th century, let us have no more cant about measures, not men. It's like saying you put the harness before the cart horse. It is men that decide policy and the measures come in second place. And undoubtedly, I think that is true, that if you don't have a compelling leader stroke collective leadership, then your party is suck. It doesn't have to be a flamboyant, boastful jokester like the current Prime Minister, for want of a better comparison. It could be somebody rather reserved, even dull, like Clement Attlee, but he surrounded himself by Ernest Bevan, by Aneurin Bevan, by Stafford Cripps, by Hugh Dalton, big people. And when you look at, I don't want to sound nostalgic, having just said it's time to move on, but I was talking to a great Labour friend who worked for Robin Cook, who's currently in Germany, just 40 minutes ago. And you look at the people around Blair and Brown then, like Mo Monum, like John Preston, like Claire Short, like Harriet Harman, like Peter Madison, like Alistair Campbell, like David Blunkett, like younger people such as Alan Milburn or Steve Byers, Scots like Brian Stanley and Alistair Darling. I mean, that really was a group of people whose talents all came together and united to provide Labour with a sense of purpose. Now that frankly we don't have. I'm not picking on Keir Starmer particularly or blaming him, though I think he could be more dynamic. He could be a bit braver. I think in politics, there's elements of showbiz are involved, and you have to find striking phrases. I'm not sure calling the Prime Minister a coward or corrupt are quite the phrases that really make sense. Once you use those phrases, once you've called a government, an administration, a corrupt administration, you've got no other higher insult. You've got no other higher point to make. And once you call a man a coward, well, what else are you then going to describe him when in 6 months' time or 9 months' time he does something that's also pretty bad? When you really used up, the maximum invective in your vocabulary. So that's the first piece are about personalities. They are unbelievably important, and Labour keeps backing losers. It had Clement Attlee was allowed. I hadn't really cottoned onto this because obviously I was sort of just barely out of nappies. But Clement Attlee was allowed to run or lead the Labour Party as a candidate in the 1955 election. Britain had changed by then. We had ITV, we'd ended wartime austerity. I think rationing had more or less finished. We had more pubs. We were driving around in cars, beginning to go on holidays again. And Labour still wheeled out by then the rather elderly Attlee, who served the country well in the war, was a great post-war Reconstruction Prime Minister, but Labour should have moved on. And it did it again in the 1980s. with Michael Foot. I love Michael Foot. He launched books of mine. I wrote a biography of Francois Mitterrand. Michael launched it for me, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely marvelous. Dennis, we all know Dennis, great friend. So good. He's writing about what's happening in Europe. He's written this wonderful book about Francois Mitterrand, who calls himself a socialist, but he seems to believe in the common market. I don't see how you can be a socialist and believe in the common market, but there we go. Let's all learn about Francois Mitterrand from Dennis's book. Michael was adorable, but he was utterly unelectable. And if truth be told, we stuck with Neil Kinnock for one election too many. And then we moved on. Finally, after poor John Smith died, we did have a good leader in Tony Blair who could connect to huge mass of people. But when he went, Ed Miliband has many strong qualities. And I at the time in 2010, I was in the Commons and I nominated David Miliband because I liked Ed. I mean, Ed was unbelievable. It was and is just one of the nicest people you will ever meet in politics. But I said to David, you do know, David, I'm the sort of European bore, the expert about European politics in the Labour Party, in the Parliamentary Labour Party. And there's no known example of a big party of power that has power for 10 years, wins 2 or 3 elections, then loses, coming back straight away. It's just a law of political gravity or chemistry, if you like. It can't happen. It's going to take at least 2 more elections before you can even think about getting back into power. And poor David Miliband said, oh, Dennis, oh, thank you very much. I said, well, I'm sorry, I thought you ought to know. And he wasn't thinking about it. Ed wasn't thinking about it. And then we went into the Corbyn era, which I don't really want to talk about. I mean, it was embarrassing. I've known Jeremy all my life. He's a preacher, not a politician. He's a moralist. He's not a Marxist. He's a home to every lost cause, great lost causes, some of them very important. But he's not a practicing politician who came within any chance or hope of being elected. We all knew that. We knew that in 2017. I was out campaigning in Tooting for a very nice woman, Dr. Rosanna Allen Khan, and a man across the road just pulled down his top bedroom window or upstairs window and shouted out at us, "Oi, you lot, none of us will ever vote Labour until you get rid of that effing communist Corbyn." He didn't say effing, by the way. Yeah, we sort of knew it, but we no mechanism for getting rid of Corbyn. I don't mean in an unpleasant way. And we no tradition in the party of leaders who were losers, accepting they weren't going to win. There's a case study in Australia of a leader of the Australian Labour Party in 1982 called Bill Hayden, very decent man, ex-policeman, good MP, good minister, not much charisma. And he realized that if he stood down for a man called Bob Hawke, who then was leader of the Australian trade union movement, also an MP, Hawke had it all. I mean, he was like a Labour Boris Johnson, gift of the gab, drinker, womanizer, liked lots of money, and just charmed America out of their seats and into voting Australian Labour. And Labour then held power for about 10 years. So sometimes the person who leads the party has to have the modesty also to realize his failings and stand down. And it'll be very interesting for me to see whether, if in due course, I'm trying to measure my words very carefully, Keir, who's a very decent man, has the self-awareness to decide perhaps he's not the man to win the next election for Labour and move on. Now, the Tories do that all the time, ruthless. Mrs. Thatcher starts to look a bit dodgy over poll tax, out she goes. Ted Heath looks dodgy over Europe, out he goes. Anthony Eden looks dodgy after Suez, out he goes. I mean, there's utter brutality. And you can see that happening now with many Conservative MPs voting with their bottoms by not going to sit behind the Prime Minister in the chamber yesterday to give him the support that he was entitled to expect as he's beleaguered, in deep trouble. That's when a party rallies round. And the Tories didn't rally round behind Mr. Johnson yesterday. And I think he's a very experienced political animal. He's been in the House or Mayor of London for 20 years, been a minister. Before that, a very good political journalist. You may not like him, you could mock him, but don't underestimate him. I would think he's getting a little bit worried now about what is going to happen. Anyway, the second P that Labour focuses on after personalities is policies. And we love policies. We have policies all the time. We have policies reviews, we have commissions, we create the Fabian Society to produce policies. We write books about policies. We debate policies. We get into furious rows over whether to back this policy or that policy. We can spend the entire life of a Labour activist, an MP, a constituency, just debating policies. They're all worthwhile and interesting. But then there's the third P of politics, which is power. And that is Labour's missing link. We have no theory of power, no doctrine of power. We have an institute for government. We have an institute for social policy, an institute for foreign policy, lots and lots of think tanks, professors, but nobody actually analysing what power is, where it's located, and how to win it. And that, I think, is a missing P. Whereas on the other hand, I would argue for the Conservative Party, they don't really care what policies are put in place. As Canning said 200 years ago, it's cant to talk about measures, not men. It's men that matter. Sorry, it was men in those days. And so they just focus pretty ruthlessly on trying to win power. They work out what to do once they've got it. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher did not come in as a sort of manic right-wing, poll taxing, trade union destroying PM. That happened bit by bit by bit. But she knew the importance of power. And we haven't had a Labour leader since, frankly, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, in a combined sense, who focused on power. So I discuss a lot of these things. And I tell lots of stories because my shelves groan with earnest books written by Labour people and academics and professors and journalists, all of them perfectly good. But I thought to try and tell my story of why Labour was so bad at winning elections through lots and lots of personal examples and anecdotes and tales. I don't know if it works, and I think it does. When people who read it say it is quite amusing and interesting. And I just want to discuss it within my Labour family, I suppose, to get them to think about power. Now, it's a big problem for Labour. We're a democratic left, social democratic, if you like, European party. And all those parties across Europe are in deep, deep trouble. The classic 20th century political parties, one big fat conservative centre-right party, Christian Democrat party, one big, not quite so fat social democratic or centre-left party, the Labour Party, the Parti Socialiste, the German Social Democrats, are all now struggling to maintain their 20th century status and votes. There are many centre-left parties in government, but never with a majority. The next German chancellor will be a social democrat, Olaf Scholz, but he won with just 25% of the vote for his party. So he's now in very tricky negotiations with the Greens and the Liberals on what government programme to have. When Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt won elections for the Social Democrats in the 1970s, they would win 45, 46, 47% of the votes. And I can rattle through all the countries of Europe, and it's the same story everywhere. So even with first past the post, which obviously gives a certain primacy to electing everybody voting just for one party or one prime minister or another, you're still finding huge difficulties mobilizing much above about a quarter of all voters. And certainly you've got a huge voter turnoff in this country. And I'm not quite sure how Labour's going to be able to overcome this. And then finally, and let's get into the questions. I mean, Labour's never, ever in its entire post-war history worked out a relationship on the European issue. If you look at the history, it's there all the time. 1950, when the iron and steel community was formed, the first embryo, first birth of European cooperation, integration, partnership, Labour said no, thank you. Clement Attlee refused it, and the man writing all the papers and wrote pamphlets and speeches to saying Labour shouldn't touch Europe with a barge pole was Denis Healey, often regarded somehow as a sort of, a very sensible giant of a Labour figure. But I can tell you, he would have fitted very neatly into a kind of Tony Benn think tank against Europe. For him, European construction was KKK, Katholiker Kapitalistische und Konservative, KKK, CCC, conservative, capitalist, and Catholic. And he said Labour should have nothing to do with it. Then a decade later, when Hugh Gaitskell was the leader, again, seen as a modernizer, as a right winger, but he makes this giant speech in 1962 saying we should have nothing to do with the common market. It's the end of 1,000 years of history. We'd end up as a province of Europe. Did our men die on Vimy Ridge? Why that particular horrible First War slaughter field? Now to surrender or to give up sovereignty, to be under the control of Europeans. Extraordinary speech. I mean, again, one that not even Nigel Farage would have dared make. And you had Wilson, who was quite cynical, knew that business and probably most of the settled opinion of the country was ready for Europe, so tried to negotiate his way in and then offered the referendum to keep the Labour Party together. But then up pops Jim Callaghan at the time. I remember as a young, just sort of out of Oxford and just beginning in politics as a young activist. And there was Jim saying, it's been said if we join this common market, everybody will have to speak French. Well, I just want to say, and I'll use the language of Chaucer, non, merci beaucoup. And this kind of primitive, jokester, silly language just played and pandered to the prejudices of people who needed education, who needed to be drawn out of the idea Britain was still a world power, an imperial power, and could make everything in Britain, and we didn't need to have any partnerships. And so don't forget, I mean, I voted no in 1975. I'm not a sort of a prelapsarian pro-European. I went with what was the left-wing flow then, right into the 1980s. The great tenors of the Blair government, like Jack Straw, like Robin Cook, many others, were all solidly anti or voted against Europe. The 1983 manifesto of Labour actually called for withdrawal from Europe. Tony Blair there's a poster up in Sedgefield when he stood in 1983, vote Tony Blair to leave the common market. And frankly, Labour's love affair with Europe, it was pretty thin skin deep. I mean, I was there. I was changed simply by working for 15 years with European trade unions, with European democratic left parties. And it just seemed to me absurd not to create a European entity that could have the power to stand up for European values, strong enough to defend the environment, defend modest social workers' rights, not just hand all power to the United States, or then Japan was seen as the China of the day, not in a hostile way to the United States, but really to speak for as many Europeans as possible and to cooperate as much as possible. So I came back preaching that to Labour Party in England. I wasn't heard to Britain to begin with, but gradually those ideas took over. And once we were in power, again, a lot of the old Eurosceptic demons surfaced. People got nervous about the euro. They got nervous about Schengen. They got nervous about European directives. I was there. It's all in my diaries. And we just became more and more or less and less convinced about Europe. I mean, Boris Johnson is spending, I don't know, £100 million on Brexit public information campaigns. Mrs. Thatcher's "Are You Ready?" Some of you might remember it, a sort of funny set of adverts with a little funny little guy in a bowler hat to get people ready for the single market. That had a budget of about 25, 30 million. Gordon Brown cut my public information budget to explain Europe to the British people to £150,000. I mean, that pays for about one cocktail or a few leaflets. And I remember a discussion with Tony coming back on from a trip to a European capital, where he'd been quite lyrical about the European Union, how important it was, and all the rest of it. And I said, Tony, I've heard you in Madrid, I've heard you in Brussels, I've heard you now in Warsaw, I've heard you in Aachen, making great pro-Europe Paris, pro-European speeches. Is there any chance you might make one in England, in Britain? And he said, oh, Dennis, what can I do? Sorry, I have to use the word effing. What can I do with the fucking media I've got? And that really was the problem. Alistair Campbell was a doughty campaigner for a second referendum and against Brexit. And my goodness, he just stopped every minister from making any pro-European speech, because it wasn't what the Daily Mail, the Sun, and the Times, the Daily Telegraph, and some of the left-wing papers, and the Guardian filled its comment pages with columns by Simon Jenkins and other people who were very, very anti-European from a left-wing point of view. You know, Owen Jones, who is a sort of young, well, not quite so young now, but a young sort of dynamic left columnist, invented the word Lexit, left-wing Brexit, before the referendum. He changed his mind. He said, oh God, hold your nose and vote to stay in. But you've got friends like that. Selling Europe was pretty difficult. So Labour's got to wake up, and I'll finish on this point, in my judgment, and devise some policies on Europe. Again, pulling the duvet over your head and saying, let's not talk about Brexit. Okay, we won't talk about rejoin. Let's make Brexit work. What the hell does that mean? You've now got clear opinion polls showing not just a majority of people thinking that the vote in 2016 was a mistake. We've had that majority for some time, but now actually votes saying that if there was a new referendum, they'd vote to rejoin. It's quite a small majority. It's in the margin of error. And unfortunately, I expect it represents the majority of older people, because there's a huge mass of younger people, my children in their 20s and 30s. I hope they're all pro-European, but there's an awful lot who just don't vote and get all their information from social media, who never get a newspaper through the letterbox. And it's slightly unclear, where that might be, which is why I'm just cautious on instantly pressing a button saying rejoin, rejoin, rejoin. I think it will probably take some years. America voted for isolation in 1920, turned its back on Europe, really, and the world. And they were isolated for 20 years until, frankly, the Second World War brought them back in, despite having an internationalist president like Roosevelt. And Britain voted not to join Europe in 1950, and we had to wait 23 years to 1973 before we joined. I hope it won't be as long as that, but I don't think it's going to happen quickly. I think it's going to need a change of prime minister, maybe change of government, maybe 2 elections before you can get into real territory. But you should start talking about it as soon as possible. I'm waiting, frankly, for the first anniversary of Brexit, full Brexit, in other words, 1st of January, in 6 weeks' time, and then I'm going to start just gently nudging and writing and saying, hey guys, this isn't working, it's bad for the country, it's not working for us as individuals, we need a rethink. And I hope more and more Labour people will be joining with me. I was talking to one of the shadow cabinet members last night, and he agreed that he, in his area, work and pensions, needs to have a policy that is convincing, and a lot of the best ideas, frankly, come from best practice elsewhere in Europe. We should start relearning them again. Okay. Well, those are some opening marks. So
Dennis, this subject tonight has aroused a lot of interest. I think the positioning of the Labour Party is of huge importance and curiosity to many people, because otherwise there seems to be a kind of ever-ending, never-ending conservative rule. So we have some questions which the little group that Evelyn leads has put together. I've also written down quite a lot of the questions from the chat, and there are quite a lot of them. I'm actually not now going to look at any more questions on the chat, so I'd probably rely on Ian and Evelyn. If there are fascinating questions coming up, please get me to ask them or ask them yourselves. Can we start, Dennis, talking about the positioning of the major political parties? You talk about policies, and then you say the Tories, all they want is power. But nevertheless, we do talk about left, centre right, right. Tony Blair moved the Labour Party, whether it meant anything, I don't know, from having clause 4 about common ownership of the economy to a more social democratic approach. So he effectively took the Labour Party from socialism to social democracy. In your book, you wrote about the very significant growth in no-party voters from traditionally maybe up to 25% of voters to now a good 50%, people who don't have affinity or identification with any one party. So I think what I'd ask you first is if you can characterize the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, maybe even Scots Nats, in terms of their political philosophy.
I think there's a classic divide that's probably been there since they sat on the left and the right side of the chamber in the National Assembly in France after the Revolution, which is where all this began from. Gilbert Sullivan, which one of their operas says everybody's born a little conservative or a little liberal. I can't remember which one of the operas that's in. And there is just that natural inclination. Now that's well and good. So you want to change things, you want to reform things, you want to oppose social injustice. Others say, well, just let life continue as is, as Alexander Pope wrote, whatever is right. That's the ultimate conservative philosophy. The existing order is perfectly sensible, and don't try and rip it up. And then it's a question of degree. I mean, right now, the complaint from many of the right-wing commentators, especially on the economic pages of the papers, is that Boris Johnson is a socialist prime minister. I mean, he's spending like crazy, he's taxing like crazy. There's a lot of new taxes coming in here. Just watch this space. And there may be more if he wants to nudge us all off from driving cars. Luckily, my car was stolen 3 years ago, and I'm now kind of wonderfully green biker and walker and public transporter. And the Conservatives in the 1950s taxed quite merrily, or they invented new forms of taxation like the National Lottery of John Major, which has turned Britain into a fantastically high-achieving East German type sports country. And then we were all queuing to pay taxes. We all queued up and got our little ticket and hoped we might win something. And that £1 or £5, whatever it was, that was a tax that went straight into the exchequer. Oh, wow. There was a sort of National Lottery Commission that divvied it up. And so all the time, you're working out how to tax and spend. And in broad terms, the left wakes up in the morning and sees something that doesn't seem to be fair or just and says, let's make it better. The right wake up each morning and say, well, a lot of this will solve itself. Leave well alone. Let's not get too stuck in. And in the meantime, we don't want to change. And we want to, protecting privileges is rather silly. But we want to preserve the rights of capital. We want to preserve the rights of mobility of money making. And it's a permanent dialectic. And all the time, your task, I think, on the left is perhaps not to do obviously unpopular and stupid things. So in the after 2010, I would argue it was stupid to say, let's pull out of the European Union. I would argue it was stupid to say, let's abolish all nuclear deterrent in the UK. The perfectly good moral case, ethical case for the latter. I don't think there's such a good case for the former, but you have to park policies that don't work. And the Tories, it seems to me, are better at parking those policies. They don't fight the old battles. After the war, the Conservatives never challenged the massive increase of the social state, the NHS, the welfare state, nationalisation of industries, state planning, a lot of allocation of resources decided by the state. But that's where the people were. The Tories were with them, and Labour always seems to me takes too long to get to where the people are.
So you seem to be saying that the Tories are more pragmatic and the Labour Party is more purist. I did notice in your book that you wrote that the people who were Liberal Democrats were the people who read The Guardian and shopped at Waitrose. It was kind of slightly slighting description of the Lib Dems.
I love Lib Dems, cheap remarks. I mean, what I said was that they're Tories who read The Guardian and shop at Waitrose. Foul and disgusting slander, which I, of course, instantly withdraw. But I remember the most passionate debates with Paddy Ashdown. Paddy came, I'm a great skier, and I was captain and leader of the parliamentary ski team. I even won a prize as the fastest British skier once. And Paddy came out on one of the ski trips, and I discovered an odd thing about him. He was a great smoker. I kind of thought, super fit Paddy, action man Paddy. My God, he was puffing away like mad. But he told me that we had to have a referendum on membership of the European Union. This is about the year 1998, 1999, I'm not quite sure when. And on joining the euro, which actually was already the Blair Brown policy. I said, Paddy, if you have a referendum on euro, we will lose. We just will lose. To be a populist plebiscite. Not necessarily about immigration or about Pakistanis, it'll be about Enoch Powell themes. This is a bit pre-Farage. Not necessarily, you've got all the Murdoch press, the Daily Mail press, you've got William Hague ranting, demanding referendums on the Nice Treaty and the Amsterdam Treaty. What the heck are you doing going with those people? He said, no, it's democratic, Dennis. We must have more democracy. So that...
Okay, but we'd better move on, Dennis. You're saying again that purism doesn't really wash in politics.
Not quite.
Now, one of the things that you've said is that socialist or left of centre parties throughout Europe are in trouble, in deep trouble. And we have a question from Roger Adams, which is, why is this swing to the right happening? What's going on?
There isn't actually a swing to the right. What there is a swing away from established, classical, traditional, centre-left, social democratic parties, such as were not dominant in Europe, on the contrary. I mean, Italy was largely run by the Christian Democrats. Germany has had far longer periods of Christian democratic rule than social democratic rule. And if anything, the worry of maybe 5 or 6 years ago that the sort of harder right, the nationalist right, was going to sweep all before it has turned out to be false. There's a professor at Kent University called Matthew Goodwin who was pumping this thesis out. And I remember him writing before the 2015 election that UKIP would win at least 4 or 5 MP seats in the House of Commons. And I said they won't. I mean, Farage is a one-note politician. And that's about immigration, immigration, immigration. He's got no answer on petrol prices or on police on the streets or students' fees or anything. And people, when they elect a whole government, if they have a referendum on immigration or on the European Union, they'll march with Farage. But when they elect a government that's going to handle pensions, care of the elderly with Alzheimer's, etc., 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 they're not interested in Farage's single-stroke solutions. And if anything, people like Marine Le Pen, Matteo Salvini in Italy, the AfD in Germany, Geert Wilders, have fallen back slightly. And so now what you've got is a much more kaleidoscopic politics. So in Germany, right now, as I speak, I think it's all being finalized. They want to make the man chancellor early in December. It's a coalition between the Social Democrats, the Liberals. Liberals in Germany are actually quite right wing. I mean, they're orthodox, fiscal, sound money, low taxes, and the rest of it. Don't like European expenditure. And the Greens, who have got a lot of policies, most of which don't sit very comfortably with the worker base of German social democracy, the giant car factories, the steel factories, the electrical factories, the manufacturing sector, which of course is very worried as green policies are applied strictly and strongly, that an awful lot of their jobs will go. And this, they'll find a way, they'll find a modus vivendi. We don't do that with our first past the post system. We've never had to. I do think at the next election, I was with quite a bunch of people at a book launch last night of big political reporting and writing names. And people just don't see a majority government. And so the big question of Scotland and the SNP come into play there. So under force majeure, we did think first past the post was our God-given system that would ensure always there'd be a majority government and a stable government. And frankly, my adult life, we've lived through some periods of very unstable government, and some periods of strong government, but they certainly weren't very pleasant government. So I think we're going to have to start to learn under that pressure, because if everybody wakes up in 2 years' time and Labour's got 280 MPs and the Tories have got 280 MPs, and the Lib Dems, I hope, start to come back a bit. They have 20, and the Scots Nats have 40 or 50. Well, some people are going to have to start making compromises.
So maybe we are moving into an era with or without first past the post of coalitions. But just to clear the ground first, Tony McCobb asks you whether Labour could get a majority under first past the post.
Taking into account Scotland, no. I listened to our Scottish Shadow Secretary, a young man called Ian Murray, who was named Shadow Secretary for Scotland by Ed Miliband, and then renamed by Jeremy Corbyn, and then renamed by Keir Starmer. For the simple, he's a very able guy. He should be doing Shadow Secretary of Health or Education or something else. A very, very bright Scot from Edinburgh, a lovely, warm man, by the way. But he's the only Scottish Labour MP, so he's stuck being doing this ghastly job of Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland, which doesn't really exist given there's a Scottish government. And he was telling us, the Labour Party meeting, he was zooming into us, I was there on Tuesday night. He said, I don't really see big gains for Labour. It's very hard from all my conversations with Scottish Labour friends. The SNP are just not dislodgeable easily. So I think we could, the next Parliament could end up without a majority. That phrase "hung Parliament's" a stupid one, and then it will be very, very interesting to see whether what kind of compromise either Labour, if it's still headed by Sir Keir Starmer, makes, or indeed the Tories. I think it's a much bigger problem for us because we don't want to see the union break up. We do want to get back into Scotland. I don't think for Boris Johnson and his present Tory colleagues, they give a flying toss about Scotland. If Scotland wants to go off and play its games as a sort of funny little Balkan offshoot country north of the border, fine. They will have a England that permanently and forever will be under Tory rule.
So what you seem to be saying is that the only opportunity for Labour in Scotland is to make an alliance with the SNP. And Linda Pett asks you whether, in fact, the only way to defeat the Conservatives is for the centre-left parties to enter coalition.
Well, by definition, yes. I mean, if they all win enough seats to form an effective majority. But there were some hints of that in, excuse me, in 2010. If you remember, David Cameron didn't win a majority. He got more seats than Labour. And I remember Angus MacNeil, who was the leader of the SNP MPs in Parliament, but he's gone back to be a full-time MSP and sees himself as Nicola Sturgeon's successor, and handed over the parliamentary leadership in Westminster to Ian Blackford. But Angus, who's a good friend, came up and said, "Oh, you must get people have to talk to your people about all of this." But then it came down to the Liberals, who weren't interested really in cooperating with Labour at that stage. And Nick Clegg, I personally think it's a tragic.
They were certainly damaged by cooperating with the Conservatives.
Yes.
There's a question.
Peter, could I just jump in a moment, because I'm not sure this subject has been explored as much as it should be, and I do notice that one of the questions from somebody else, from Mr. Roger Adams, is what is Labour's attitude to PR? And I have a similar viewpoint.
You and I think exactly alike, because that was going to be my next question.
Oh, well.
Roger Adams.
Okay.
And not only what is Labour's attitude to PR, but would they bring it in if they got into power?
Right. Well, I'm not conflicted on PR. I've lived in Switzerland, for heaven's sake, which is the most PR-run country imaginable at almost every level, and it works quite well. Bringing it into Britain will be difficult for three reasons. Firstly, if a party wins a big enough, overwhelming majority to have a majority to push through the Commons, a clear change to the electoral practice, in other words, a huge constitutional change to introduce PR, well, it's got that many members to do that. It doesn't actually need the help from any other party. So the paradox is, to get to PR, do you do it in cooperation with other parties, in which case you're already in a weak position? We have had the experience. I mean, Tony Blair was not unsympathetic, I can tell you. Robin Cook was strongly in support. I personally, having worked and lived a lot in European countries, do not think it's quite the magic solution. There are some very nice PR countries, but they also produce Viktor Orban and Kaczynski and the Israeli government and lots of governments, and particularly political systems, where everything is decided by the party bureaucracy, because when PR, you had huge power to the party. Maybe we could find ways around that. They tried to do it in Scotland. Whether it's worked fully or not is a matter for debate. So, and the other difficulty is, I think it would be hard to put through PR without a referendum. Now, we did have a modest referendum on a form of PR, the alternative vote, if you remember, at the beginning of the Tory Liberal government of Cameron and Clegg, and it was overwhelmingly defeated. Tony gave to Roy Jenkins the task of bringing in a sort of almost a one-man commission on PR, and I remember Roy bringing it to a very crowded Westminster Hall committee room, about 150 MPs of all parties there. And he was shredded from top to bottom. Because basically he was inviting these guys, and it wasn't particularly Tory or Labour, to give up their seats. And that's quite a big ask. So I'm only reporting that to you from within the belly of the beast. I mean, in theory, there are a lot of arguments for PR. We know them all. People vote and their vote doesn't count. But under PR, you vote and your party never, ever, it may get the most seats, but it never actually runs the country. So that's the counter argument. I don't feel the mood in at the moment. I mean, look, 80% of constituency parties in Labour supported PR at the last Labour Party conference, the one in Brighton a month or so ago. 80%, including my own. In fact, the young delegate from here made a very, very good speech in favour of PR. I was delighted to see this young man. He's got a big future. But the trade unions just killed it dead because they have the stranglehold on policy, and they want a government where they can just phone up ministers, walk in, I won't say thump the table anymore, and get instant access because the Labour Party is our party. Well, you have to
okay, well, we have some questions on the trade union exactly of that kind. But just before, would you not accept that we are the standout country in Europe? We are the only country in Europe virtually which doesn't have government by coalition, government by compromise, government. What we love is the Prime Minister's questions, jousting in the Commons, and we think that's powerful government. Don't you think that actually PR would introduce a new form of government into Britain, which would be extremely healthy?
I think on balance, yes. Believe me, I'm tracking French politics very closely at the moment, writing about every week a report on the French presidential election, so I know France very well. If you want to see vicious, ad hominem, accusatory, shouting in the chamber politics, believe me, try France. It's a bit of a myth that everywhere in Europe PR allows for sort of consensual, common sense agreement on key issues. It doesn't, and it can't, and it shouldn't, because politics shouldn't be just about that. But I think the going in that direction. I mean, I certainly supported tactical voting. I'd like to see a lot more of that. But again, the problem with that is for me to say and I did. I produced a list of 60 seats in 2001, where I said people should vote. I didn't say vote Liberal, it's pretty obvious what I meant. Vote for the candidate best placed to defeat the Tory. 60 fewer Tories for me as a Labour guy was a huge godsend. And in the tea room, a lot of my friends, colleagues, what the hell are you doing? What's this about, Dennis? What's going on? One guy phoned me up, said, right on, Dennis, please go on the Today programme tomorrow and make your case. That was Tony Blair, because he actually understood the point I was trying to make. But there is a great result. And I then asked a couple of my Liberal friends, and I've got friends across the party divide. I said, hey, could you write a similar article, 60 seats where the Lib Dems should stand, not stand down. The voters should tactically vote. None of them would. I'm putting that in as a little anecdote. It's not very, very important. But there is a deep tribalism. And if you go to people and say, right, we have decided this constituency, Westminster, this constituency, North East Surrey, this constituency, Watford, we are going to run a candidate for the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, and we want you all to combine to vote the Tories. All those people who have been campaigning and maybe giving money and believing in the Labour Party or the Liberal Party will say, what do you mean? I'm not going to rip up my identity just for a bit of jiggery pokery you've decided in London, the headquarters of the parties. The case has to be made. I think probably, again, I think we've got to go through another couple of bloody awful elections with no real clear result before finally something will emerge. I'm sure we all studied, those of you who studied A-level history as I did at school, will remember all the great comings and goings over reform bills. They don't happen quickly. They demand huge mobilization, a lot of arguments, a lot of popular support in the media and the press at the moment. So yeah, I don't think the first past the post is remotely an attractive.
Okay, well, let's move the questioning on. You mentioned trade unions. We also have a question which I'd like to take before that on party funding.
Yeah.
You wrote that democracy should pay for democracy. I think that's what you said, which meant effectively that major donations to political parties should be declared illegal and they should be funded by the state. Jay Mandel had a similar question about party funding and what the position is in other countries in Europe, and why Labour has refused to back the line on reforming party funding. And indeed, why party funding is not currently a major public trust issue in the UK.
Look, I think it's what leads to the greatest level of corruption. I mean, retired ministers making a bit of money, advising firms in different ways. That happens in lots of countries. I remember one very famous, it became a very senior minister, I mustn't mention his name, but he told me in 2005 that he had made so much money from speaking tours of the Gulf, because a lot of these countries that aren't very democratic will pay a British politician 50,000, 100,000. I mean, I think Theresa May's earned over £1 million. And this man said he made enough to retire and have an income for the rest of his life. Because, of course, what those countries were doing, or those governments were doing, regimes were doing, was buying access to him, not then in opposition, but they would hope in 5 years' time, when he was in government in a powerful post, as indeed he was. And then when the ministers stopped being MPs, John Major goes off and is chairman of the Carlyle Group, a sort of big American conglomerate, or the British wing of it. Tony Blair goes off to do the stuff that he did, and Nick Clegg goes off to make a couple of $1 billion, $1 million a year with Facebook. Now, I don't know what you say to those men and women. Well, you've got to stay in relative poverty, or just not very well paid. If you're a barrister, do you have to stop practicing? If you're a journalist, because I remember I raised this 20 years ago in the Commons and said, we've really got to have, it's my phrase, democracy should pay for democracy, like they do in Germany, like they do in the Netherlands, like they do in Sweden, like they do in Spain, and no ifs and buts, and no add-ins on, everything transparent. Still doesn't stop crookery. I mean, Mr. Sarkozy in France has had a prison sentence. I mean, he won't have to serve it because he took a huge amount of money from Gaddafi and other Arab sources to win the 2007 election. But at least he's on notice and he's shamed and disgraced. I mean, I love the idea that Britain has got the least corrupt political system. I mean, none of our ministers. And what was David Cameron doing, going off to work for this Australian chancellor, suborning, phoning up all his contacts, demanding this man's dodgy scheme should be seriously considered by the government. So yes, I think that's a big reform. I suggested it, I remember in the Foreign Office when I was PPS and with Robin Cook, who's a good friend. And Robin just said, no, Dennis, I mean, the British public would never accept the idea of taxpayers paying for politics. And I said, well, Robin, fine, but we're just going to get into so much trouble over this. And indeed, we had to go to the most interminably balls-aching donor conferences, sit with perfectly nice businessmen and schmooze them and charm them in the hope they would then sign a big check to Labour. And when we were running out of money, Tony had to ask for loans, which then got into the loans for lordships thing. Because what do they want? They want a knighthood. They want a peerage. I mean, this is the only country in the world where, Peter, if you or I were rich enough, I'll give you the name and address now. You could just sign a check for a couple of million quids and you'd be a lord tomorrow. And nobody seems to bat an eyelid at this or think it's a bad idea or protest about it.
Well,
And
can I just challenge you on that? Don't you think that the tide of public opinion is turning on that? Of course, those who have spare cash and want to buy lordships will love to do so. But I have to say that a number of your answers, Dennis, seem to be a counsel of despair. There's nothing you can do about first past the post. There's nothing you can do about party funding. There's nothing you can do about the trade unions. I mean, where are we then?
No. It's not a counsel of despair. It's an appeal for people to mobilise. And as I said, I've been writing and arguing for public funding, as I say, democracy paying for democracy, probably since I joined Parliament 30 years ago. And that's not because of I'm a great moralist of these things, but I just saw how it worked in other countries, and it worked perfectly well. Not entirely satisfactorily, but it can be done, and it cleans so many things up. I've been campaigning to get rid of the House of Lords for the same reason. But you say to the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the Labour Party, the leader of the Lib Dem Party as well, that's no more nominations. That huge power of patronage you have to make somebody a law, to make somebody a lawmaker, plus all the pomp and the prestige.
We have a question from Jay Mandel about an elected second chamber. And I think the implication is that all this Lord's reform is going incredibly slowly. Our constitution is creaking, and we seem to be incapable of modernizing it. We talk blithely about global Britain and example to the world, but can't we change our constitution to fit the present temper of the world?
I think so. I think the work Gordon Brown is doing may be of interest, because, of course, the problem of House of Lords reform is linked also, I think, to the utter centralisation of everything in and around and towards London. The Drang nach London, as the Germans might call it, is just so overwhelming. It got far worse in my lifetime, I would say. And that's why we need a big power breakout to create English regions. Scotland, obviously Wales, Northern Ireland have their clear identity and existence. And that is the big next challenge. And that's, again, you inviting parties that for 200 or 300 years have only thought of one thing: winning that majority in that little chapel, whatever it was, tiny chamber in Westminster. We don't have a press for it. The left have never taken it seriously because they thought it would interfere with and drive towards socialism. And we've not really had a settled acceptance of the one reform that we might all be able to agree on, because everyone then pops up and says, no, we need PR. No, we need this. I mean, my own desire would be to absolutely just to stop any external funding of politics from any private source, from trade union source, because that also would be a clear message to the trade unions, the fact that they could sign a check for £5 or £10 million to Labour, therefore gave them privileged rights of access to Labour. That was over. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the continent. No other party, Labour left party, has trade union leaders getting up and not dictating, just telling the party what to do and saying, oh, by the way, I've got X thousand votes, and by the way, I've got a very fat checkbook. Can't happen in Germany or France, Spain, where I'm going tomorrow, Greece or anywhere. But this is all right. There's a few other problems. Who are the Lords? Well, it's the Duke of Prince of Wales. It's the Duke of Cambridge. It's the Duke of this. It's the Duke of that. I don't want to get into the question of the monarchy. But all of this is interconnected, and we're such a traditionalist country, Peter. I wish that wasn't the case.
Hang on, Peter, let me have a little go at this. Because I really think it needs more challenging. I think it's very easy for us to not realize how ridiculous we must seem from outside. I do a little bit of writing on the internet, and I personally call all the lords and people Mr. I look up what their proper name is and call them Mr. And I think that would be a start. Why should these people be part of the corrupt procedure, which is pretty generally admitted? Certainly, I agree. Why should the unions have that voting power? And really, all we ought to be doing is arguing about in what order we can improve our politics. So over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Aaron Bevan famously said that the language of priorities is the religion of socialism. And in a sense, part of left and liberal, democratic, progressive reform politics is we want to do everything. And we don't prioritize, we don't focus, and we don't decide on one or two things. I would start myself certainly with the House of Lords. I propose in my book, for example, and it's caused a little bit of uproar, the idea of term limits for MPs. 4 terms, I'm not sure, or age. I mean, cardinals, I think, can't vote for the Pope over the age of 75 or 80, but Dennis Skinner was tottering around and Ken Clark was tottering around, well past that age. So they're just mechanical devices like that. I would get rid of the annual Labour Party conference. Again, it doesn't happen in most other countries. It's just a huge, weak and drunken stupidity with no policy decided, and an awful lot of bad behaviour. So there are little technical small things that might be decided. But the biggies for me are we have to de-Londonise to some extent Britain. I mean, I obviously wish Her Majesty a peaceful number of years, but when she goes, maybe that is a moment when people might say, well, let's have a different monarchy, one that perhaps isn't all based in London with all the flummery of colourful soldiers dressed up like, like every colour under the sun. Let them live in Windsor, let them rotate around the country. Let's just have one. Let's get rid of all the other hangers-on. And you should see Kensington Palace. I mean, it's the biggest council housing estate for free, wonderful flats that nobody has to pay a rent for.
Dennis, we have a kind of major question which has come in from Phil Robinson. He asked, isn't the whole concept of party politics totally outdated in modern pluralistic democracies, as the immutable divisions it causes are totally inconsistent with good governance? He then says, wouldn't a system on the lines of corporate governance be far more suited to our 21st century requirements? And I'll just add one question to that, which came in from Monica Dyer, which says, shouldn't we headhunt our leaders?
Well, we do headhunt leaders. So the parties are doing that all the time. I think you'll find there might be some quiet headhunting going on in the behind closed doors by the Conservative Party right now. There certainly is, I can tell you, in the Labour Party. No, I mean, look, the Mussolini called the Italian state corporatismo. Be very, very careful where you go on that line. Yes, it's messy, it's noisy, it throws up a lot of idiots, but when you hand all power over to people who aren't elected, then you are, I think, in a much, much worse state. I mean, that's where President Xi is heading for in China. So I think all things considered, and I also speak from, living in Switzerland, having 2 of my kids born there, liking the country a lot. they have incredibly polemical politics, but they found, because it's such a difficult country to govern, it's, you fight over language, you fight over Catholics against Protestants, huge issues. I mean, the Canton of Geneva will still not allow the Jesuits to have there's no Catholic cathedral there because they see themselves as a Calvin Protestant state. So I think we still have to, we really need to just not to sort of start throwing away elections too much. By all means, I've seen some of the headhunters come into Commons, like Archie, what's his name? He used to run ASDA. He was useless. Archie Norman, yes. I mean, whenever you send these top businessmen into the Commons, they really are utterly useless. It's a horrible profession, politics. A man called Aristide Briand, a French politician, said that good politics has to be like a good andouillette. I don't know if any of you on trips in France have ate there, rather sort of revolting sausage. Said both have to smell slightly of shit. De la merde was the word he used.
Okay, I think we better move swiftly on here. Dennis, can we move on to the B word, Brexit and relations with the EU, and indeed a very brief question about racism. In your book, you describe the dislike of ordinary people in Britain, of foreigners. Why is that? Is it related to racism? Is it a reason for the Brexit vote to leave? What can be done about this apparent British tribalism, or should I say English tribalism?
No, I think it's common. It exists elsewhere in Europe. I mean, let's not be little angels on this. It is senses of identity, of language, of distinction. The question is, we have more politicians, oddly enough. Perhaps it's harder to do under a PR system where everybody's got a stake and skin in the game. Here we had Enoch Powell. Many of us, I expect, are of a generation to remember him, with Mrs. Thatcher saying they mustn't swamp us. I quoted Jim Callaghan, what a crazy idea if people have to speaking French in France. What a terrible thing for Britain. And so on. Daily Mail in the 1930s had headlines saying they're allowing too many Jews into the country. This is a small overcrowded island. There's a population of 35 million there. They're swamping the professions. We can't let them in, and so on and so on and so on. And so racism was, oddly enough, modern British xenophobia isn't particularly racist. Boris Johnson's Brexit cabinet, I think, is probably the most multiracial in the world, or certainly in democracies. If you actually look at the number of so-called BAME cabinet members, to use that sort of slightly ugly acronym. And what they found, of course, was that they could whip up xenophobia against nice white Catholics. The Federation of Poles of Great Britain published a report in 2008 of 50 hate headlines in one paper alone: Polish killer, Polish rapist, Polish swindler, Polish fraudster, Polish arsonist, Polish crook. What was that paper? Our favorite morning and Sunday read, the Daily Mail. And so it's so easy to whip all of that up. And then if you then allow an outlet for it through Cameron's historic era of offering the referendum, and if I may say so, other well-meaning parties who kept insisting we must have a referendum on the European Union, I kept begging them and saying that a referendum is a populist plebiscite. It will unleash all sorts of forces that will be uncontrollable, and it will be a vote on immigration. So I think, that said, what I found again and again was, as an MP, minister, just an MP, when you're on the doorstep, nobody mentioned Europe. Every poll put Europe about 20th, below petrol prices or crime or litter or noisy children or barking dogs. But if you said to them, do you think Europe's got too much power? Of course it does. Do you think there are too many Europeans? Of course there are. Do you think we should be allowed a referendum on Europe? We must have a referendum on Europe. And in other countries, Germany's got more EU citizens working there than we ever had. Poland has got 2 million Ukrainians, but there's no political campaign to send the Ukrainians home in Poland or in Germany to close the frontiers, because unfortunately, we had a Labour Party that for too long of its existence could only find fault with Europe, and then like ships crossing in the night in the 1990s.
Well, Dennis, you were the Minister for Europe,
yeah,
of the Labour Party. You wrote in your book that on Brexit, the plain fact is that Britain fell out of love with Europe. And I would ask you, as ex-Minister for Europe,
yeah,
what did you do to try and turn the tide and make us love Europe a little more?
Well, I made endless speeches, but I tried to get Gordon Brown to make a speech. I mean, my speeches have no impact. There's only one or two politicians in a government that anybody ever listens to, the Prime Minister usually, and maybe one or two others. Tony wouldn't make those speeches in Britain. Alistair Campbell, as I said, he called in Robin Cook's two chief advisors early on when Robin was Foreign Secretary and said, get all that European shit out of Robin's speeches. I mean, this is all a matter of record. It's in my diaries, it's in other books. And we paid a terrible, terrible price because we just thought that, oh, it was great to beat up John Major on Europe over the social charter and other idiocies of mistakes that poor John Major made. And that's the problem solved. No, you have to be talking positively about Europe all the time. I mean, if we approach Europe, if we approach NATO in the same way that we've approached Europe in our lifetimes, Peter, with either one of the two big parties always hostile to NATO, always denigrating it, saying we're told what to do by Americans, our armed forces are no longer our own. If we had a referendum on NATO, we'd be out of that as well. So I'd say don't have an answer. And I do think a lot of techie problems to do with enlargement and the introduction of the euro, the financial crisis, the image of Europe after 2000 was quite negative. The treatment of the Greeks, the incorporation was the biggest project in world history. You took 10 or more third world economies and integrated them into a first world system. And on the whole, it's worked. If you're in Croatia or Slovenia, you're in Poland, even in bits of Bulgaria, the Baltic states, I mean, their life in every sense has been transformed thanks to European Union membership. But in the cozy, comfortable Germany or bits of France or this country, suddenly we're having to pay more, we're having to agree much tighter rules to make these countries integrate efficiently, and people disliked it. And so if you didn't have a confident press, again and again, I would listen to the Today programme 20 years ago, and there would be John Humphreys, he wasn't telling lies, but he was just talking nonsense. And he was allowing Farage and William Hague to talk nonsense. And once in a while, I could go on, but I can't be on the Today programme every morning and say, that's not true. We don't pay that much. We get this back from Europe. But my fellow colleagues as ministers, frankly, didn't have that fluency or maybe that commitment.
Yeah, I think the audience here tonight would wish there was more of that, and including from the European movement, who don't seem to get into the media at all. There's a question here relating to Brexit and Labour from Alan Yearsley. And I think you've partially answered it, but I'd like to ask you again, which is Keir Starmer's approach to Brexit the right one?
I think it's difficult. I mean, politics is enormously about instinct. You have to be both Alex Ferguson and structure an approach to managing a team to get the team to win, but also at the same time be Ronaldo or whoever you like, David Beckham, and turn on a sixpence and score a magic goal. Keir's strength is not turning on a sixpence and setting the stadium alight with great funny words. He is, I mean, bashed away by this endless refrain from all of the papers, including, as I say, the broadly pro-European press, like the Guardian principally, and maybe a bit the New Statesman. But the New Statesman is full of very negative articles about Europe, as can be the Guardian. So, whereas all the other press says constantly, if you say there's anything wrong with Brexit, you're a Remainer. You want to reverse the democratic decision of the British people of 2016. I say, yes, I do. I've always wanted to reverse a democratic decision that I thought was a wrong one. I'll work and campaign to change the government or change the policy. I've no shame in saying that. He's too nervous to do it. I mean, the Labour Party was burnt because obviously an awful lot of working class votes. The losers of globalization, the losers of liberalization, the losers of austerity thought the way we get our revenge back on the elites is by voting out their project, Europe, because Europe was seen as something that happened at the Davos World Economic Forum or at places in Brussels where strange men and women met and decided lots of laws over which Britain had no real influence. Not true. And so, but you look at other referendums in Europe this century, France and the Netherlands on the Constitutional Treaty voted down. Treaty of Lisbon, Ireland voted down. Entry into the Euro in Sweden voted down. Even a sort of trade agreement with Ukraine, for some reason, had to be put to a referendum in the Netherlands, voted down. And so you put Europe on the ballot paper, I'm afraid, and certainly this decade, on the whole, the answer has been no thanks. So it's a long education process. I mean, I'm saddened by business. Business were the drivers of European integration in the years after 1950, in the 1960s, 1970s, the single market with Mrs. Thatcher. And then they sort of gave up the ghost when their political party, namely the Conservative Party, moved to a more hostile position in the 1990s. And the business has never really come back. I mean, I talked to so many business people. I begged them in 2015, 2016 to put money into serious campaigns to be able to go and talk to their employees, not me personally, but just go and talk to employees, explain why if they voted out, certain things would happen, which we are now seeing those certain things happening. Ugh, it's all too political, Dennis. No, we can't do that. We're not. In other words, we're not going to challenge a Tory government. We're prepared to beat up on Labour on social Europe, but they would never, ever, CBI, the British Chambers of Commerce, the IOD, and all the people running them are good people, many of them personal friends of mine. They weren't prepared to use their money power, their influence, particularly the direct relationship they had with their employees, to make the case for Europe.
Dennis, was that not because those business bosses didn't want to annoy half their customers? And it became so divisive, so 50-50-ish, that they were worried about that, surely.
No, I mean, their customers, look, it was 36% of the 37% of the total electorate who voted for Brexit. And of those, a good proportion were elderly people, I mean, like me, sorry, I'm not being precious, who aren't, particularly sort of fashion buyers or keeping the tills ringing. No, I don't think the customers would have given particularly a toss at all. What I said was to firms, look, we need workplace meetings. We need to involve trade unions in the workplace if you have them. Big problem for businesses, of course. And then you have to go visit people at home. The way Mrs. Thatcher broke the miners' strike in the big one that Scargill ran was she sent round, or agents for her, sent round people to knock on doors, 5 o'clock tea time in miners' homes, and explain politely, pleasantly why the strike would lead nowhere. They would lose jobs, income, maybe houses, and perhaps they should consider as many people were going back to work. It was to break the strike, but it needed that one-on-one personal canvassing. And frankly, it was too late. By the time of the Brexit referendum campaign being announced with that chap who used to run Marks and Spencer's, it was all over. I mean, the signs had been set. The BBC. I mean, right now we've refused in London to allow a racist anti-European called Eric Zemmour to hold a public meeting. When I say we, London has, not me personally. As has Vienna, as has Geneva. But we allowed the British National Party and Farage. I mean, Farage was on Question Time almost every 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, 30 or 40 appearances in the period running up to the Brexit campaign. No other MEP got more than one showing, and very few of them did. That was the BBC, played a huge, they said, Farage is so incredibly popular. I kept saying, if he's so popular, why can't he win a House of Commons seat? That's the test of electoral politics.
Dennis, I've got one more question I'm going to ask you, if I may, which is all about Labour winning power and about you mentioned Maggie Thatcher and knocking on doors as something which she succeeded at. But something in your book you wrote about was something she failed at, which was the poll tax. And you wrote that mass mobilization can work. And of course, in those days, there wasn't any social networks, there were no iPhones to link people, there was no WhatsApp chat group, etc. But nevertheless, there was a mass movement which defeated the poll tax. Do you see a mass movement potentially, perhaps spearheaded by the young? And I have a statistic here from Evelyn, which is that just over 3/4 of those aged 18 to 34 would vote to rejoin. Do you see any possibility of some kind of mass mobilization shaking people a bit?
That's the most fascinating question. I agree with you. I often sometimes wonder, how on earth did the French Revolution or the American Revolution happen without Twitter? Surely, nothing ever moved before social media was invented. Now, Brexit has to bite first. So far, it isn't biting. It's biting for about 1 million firms and haven't been able to trade with Europe. It's biting the sense of 48 million customs declaration forms that have to be filled in. The government is being quite canny because, for example, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, run by Mad Nad, Nadine Dorris, who is a very sort of eccentric person and not very pro-European, but they are negotiating very quietly little exceptions, derogations is the technical term, to allow British musicians and artists to go and take part in cultural festivals, music festivals in Spain and France and Italy. They're doing it one by one, just as we reinstated freedom of movement for turkeys, didn't we? We suddenly heard, my God, there'll be no turkeys available for Christmas. Therefore, whoops, let's reinstate freedom of movement for 5,000 East Europeans who can come in and be turkey pluckers. So I just think it's going to happen in small scale areas like that. A mass mobilization, I'm not entirely sure. We don't yet know, because we've been under the cosh of the pandemic, and it looks like blasted cosh is going to stay with us for much longer than any of us could possibly hope for, because of the disastrous handling of it all across Europe. I know why, not just in Britain. So people haven't quite worked out of the freedoms they've lost. The fact that you won't be able easily to buy a retirement home, the fact that you'll have to take out much more expensive insurance. Businesses certainly are feeling that. The Revolut Bank, I've got a friend there, they're having to pay £4,000 or £5,000 in visa fees to bring anybody in to work in the bank. That's probably confidential information, but it must be true for all the banks. When that starts to coalesce, it's not coalescing at the moment because there's so many other priorities. And I think there will be a change of mood, but it will be, I'm afraid, quite slow. The Swiss voted not to join the European Economic Space in 1992, and they've been negotiating ever since. That's why my last book on Brexit, I'm talking about the Labour, Must Labour Always Lose book tonight, was called Brexiternity. I'm afraid it's going to last quite a while. And we're certainly going to have to wait for the next election. And it would be interesting, I don't know who'd put the money up for it, but to have a young European party, not the European movement, frankly, they're all great friends of mine, but you know what I mean, have a young party that was prepared to stand just on let us back into Europe. Don't use that stupid word rejoin. Let us back in. Stop denying us our right to be. That's already the slogan is too long. We need, the magicians of 3-word slogans. But I'm afraid while the pandemic's there, that masks so much. But this government is it will adapt. It will change. It will relax on this. On this issue and that issue. I think it's descaling the stupid argument about Northern Ireland as we speak. So what the poll tax was unbelievably dramatic when everybody got the demand to pay identical council tax irrespective of income. So that set the whole nation aflame. Not quite sure where you've got that level of, of hitting young people or any of us in the face on Brexit. I mean, I wish we did. Maybe it will happen in a way that none of us can think of tonight. But it's an unsolved problem, and Britain, on the whole, doesn't like unsolved problems. It likes to find solutions, and Johnson's created a huge one, and he certainly isn't the man who can find any way out of this.
Right, Dennis, thank you very much.